Today on the All About Fitness podcast, it's a lot of fun to catch up with Dr. Herman Pontzer, the author of a book called Burn. How you doing today, Dr. Pontzer?
I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
Certainly, I want to say thank you for taking the time to join me and to join the listeners. And really, I was fascinated by your book, and because it really goes deep into the metabolism. And what I like about it, what I really liked about it, was the way you started off. You kind of have a very different approach towards understanding metabolism. Can you tell us a little bit about who the Hadza are and what you're studying with them and why?
Sure. Well, so it all starts because, I'm trained as an anthropologist. A lot of people on your show, I would imagine, have, dietitian training or exercise training, which is great too. I've learned a lot of sports physiology and nutrition physiology in my career, but I'm trained initially as an anthropologist. I want to know about human evolution. I want to know about how evolution shapes our body and how that deep history kind of shapes the way, our bodies react to this weird modern world that we've built for ourselves. To understand that deep physiology, that old evolutionary history, we need reference points that are ecologically like our ancestors. Now that, no population today is a perfect model of the past. We're all equally modern humans living, today, but there are a handful of populations that are still hunting and gathering. And humans have been hunting and gathering for millions of years, since even before were Homo sapiens, right? So our genus is a hunting and gathering genus, 2 million years. And so that's the lifestyle, that's the ecology that really shaped our bodies. And so, as an anthropologist, somebody who's interested in that deep history, you want to try to find a population like that you can work with and understand what life is like for them and how that affects their bodies. And so the Hadza are one of these populations.
Sorry,
Yeah,
if I can cut in here 1 second before you go into who the Hadza are,
sure.
because what I found fascinating on that is one of the biggest trends right now we know is paleo, right? I mean,
Right.
there's paleo
Right.
everything, and paleo this, paleo that, and what I loved about it was you forget whatever some mythical research somebody wrote on a blog. You
Yeah.
were living so sorry. I just wanted to
Well,
point
no,
out that paleo is one of the biggest trends right now, and here you are in the field studying it at ground level.
Yeah, well, and that's exactly right. And the idea behind paleo is right in line with what I'm saying. If you understand your past, you understand what shaped your body. That's a great start to understanding how to keep yourself healthy today. So I had the paleo mindset, in a way, the theory, the philosophy, I totally get. But as you say, so much of it is storytelling about what we think it was like. But you don't have to tell stories. You can go and actually there's still some populations that are still doing this stuff. And like I said, they're not frozen in time. They're not a perfect model, but they're a pretty good idea. They're a good window into what that kind of lifestyle is like. So the Hadza are one of these kind of populations. They live in northern Tanzania in the African savanna. They hunt and gather their foods, no crops, no vehicles, no guns, no machines, no electricity. It's wild game, wild plants, lots of wild honey. And that's how they live their life. So my work into, metabolism sort of broadly, a lot of it started with that effort to understand their physiology, how they burn calories in that kind of lifestyle.
And so I'm fascinated by that. So were you an anthropologist and you saw this? You're like, okay, well, how do they burn calories? Because when I was reading I was kind of reading it from the view. Obviously, it's my bias of a physiologist. Going saying this is really cool that he kind of teamed up with an anthropologist. But what got you interested in that field of study, doctor? I mean, what kind of made you not just study the anthropology, but kind of like the metabolic anthropology?
Sure. Well, so I'm trained, I say anthropology, but anthropology is really broad, right? So my flavor of anthropology is very much physiology, biology. I want to understand how our bodies work, how the biology of it evolved. So that's my mindset, has always been my mindset, my interest. But if you understand how any organism spends its calories, you understand a whole lot about how it evolved and what its life strategy is all about, right? Because all evolution cares about is how you turn energy into kids, right? That's the nub of it. That's all of life from an evolutionary point of view. And so, you counting the calories, following the calories, that's really, if you don't have that metabolic understanding of a species, including our own, you don't really have a great start on understanding the species as a whole. So, for me, it was really natural to ask questions about calorie expenditure.
And what was it? I mean, what'd you learn from studying the Hadza and their energy expenditure? Not only their energy expenditure and their diet. I mean, and the other thing that kind of popped in my mind was when you're out in the field, how much weight did you lose? I mean, was that was that kind of like your spa trip, or like, okay, I'm going to go spend some time in the field and plan on
Yeah.
cutting a few kilos yourself? But in all seriousness, what did
Yeah.
you really, by observing this population, what were some of your, what were one or two of your big takeaways?
Well, I mean, first let's start with the obvious stuff. They're incredibly physically active. If you're going to count steps, the men are getting about 19,000 steps a day. Women are getting about 13,000 steps a day. They're walking a lot. Women are digging up tubers with sticks out of the wild tuber root vegetables, with a kid on their back all day. So it's a lot of physical activity. We've done the accelerometry measurements on this. It's about 5 times more physical activity than the typical American gets. The diet is a very kind of whole foods diet. Obviously, nothing processed, right? But it's a mix. One of the paleo myths, I think, is that hunter-gatherer diets are meat heavy, and we don't see that with the Hadza. It's a mix. They have a mix of about 50-50 calories from meat, calories from plants and honey. So right off the bat, there's the baseline. But what we didn't know going into it, the reason that I went out and worked to get the grant money to go and put the time in to go, is because nobody had ever measured daily energy expenditures with these guys. And so there's this really good technique you can use, really precise technique you can use, called doubly labeled water, which actually uses isotopes to track how your body produces carbon dioxide. And that allows you to know, because you can't make CO2 without burning calories. You can't burn calories without making CO2. It's this really precise measure of calorie expenditure. And we went out and actually measured the calorie expenditure of adults, of men and women in the Hadza and in the Hadza community. And it was a shocker, because, we went into this knowing in our hearts that they were going to burn lots and lots more calories than we do every day. But the punchline is that even though they're much more physically active than you and me, well, maybe not you, but the typical American, calorie expenditure is completely the same, indistinguishable from sedentary folks in the industrialized world. So that was a huge, realization, and also has been, a sort of wake-up call to try to understand how metabolism works, because apparently, the old story doesn't really hold.
So, and I would just kind of sum that up, but my metabolism, so basically, and I got this from your reading, so my metabolism here in North County, San Diego, is going to burn calories relatively about the same per kilogram of body mass, right? Per like lean muscle mass. I might be a different body weight than somebody in North Tanzania of the Hadza tribe, but we're basically going to burn calories the same way, and we're going to burn about the same amount of calories doing the same activities. Is that kind of what your research demonstrated?
Yeah. So, bigger people burn more calories than small people, just because there's more of you, right? There's more cells ticking away. So you have to correct for body size and all of these kind of comparisons. But that's right. When on a kind of pound for pound comparison, they're burning the same number of calories every day as you and me. So in other words, if I pluck out at random somebody who's the same exact body size, body composition, all that stuff from America, and somebody from the Hadza population, and I measure their energy expenditures, on average, I'm going to get the exact same number for those two people, even though the lifestyles are totally different. So what that tells us is they're spending calories differently, right? The ways their body's spending calories must be really different, because there's a difference in lifestyle, but no difference in calorie expenditure.
Well, I'm kind of giggling right now because you say that, and for listeners, I'm holding up my phone. Dr. Pontzer can see my phone on the thing. And here's the primary difference, right? The Hadza tribe, if they're going to have something to eat, you said they're taking 19,000 steps. They're burning X thousand of calories a day in pursuit of their next meal, because they're a hunter-gatherer type. Meanwhile, what do I need to do to get food? I do a couple swipes, I press a button, and I pay Grubhub to come drop it off my door. I mean, that's the one thing that I was thinking about reading through your work, was that one of the big issues we have right now is the fact our energy cost here in America and in the first world, our energy cost of getting calories is completely off with the energy cost of the population you studied. I mean, is that the main primary difference of what you observed?
Yeah, that's right. That's right. They're spending all this energy to get food. We spend zero, and I think, the way that that's been interpreted, in the absence of any data, because people hadn't measured energy expenditures with the Hadza before. And let me just say, it's not just the Hadza. We've gone and looked at other populations since then. We've looked across species. We've looked at, and this isn't just them being strange. This is seems to be a general rule for humans and other species, that energy expenditures really maintain in a narrow range. That's different than what you're typically told, which is that your activity level dictates your energy expenditure. Instead, what our data are showing is that when you're less active, your body still spends those calories, but what's it spending it on, right? And I think that's where you kind of get into trouble, because we know that inflammation levels are higher in the West. We know that, reproductive hormone levels are higher. We know that stress-free activity might be higher. Certainly cortisol levels are higher. And so, the current theory here is that all of that, your body it's almost like when you go traveling and you've got a suitcase is always full. You know what I mean? You never go, even if it's a long trip or a short trip, the suitcase is always full. Well, your metabolism is kind of like that. You're going to fill your calories per day with something. And when you fill it with stuff that you don't really need to do, like inflammation, that might be one of the reasons we get so sick here in the West. And conversely, why, if you instead you fill that backpack with activity and less inflammation, then hey, now you got a protective benefit for exercise.
And that's, see, I mean, that's where I want people kind of to learn a little bit about this, about your work. And the one thing, let's take a step back now, and we kind of jumped right in to talking about your anthropology work. But let's explain, or if you could explain a little bit about what our metabolism is, because a lot of people who exercise have heard the term metabolic conditioning or metabolic this, metabolic that. But if you could go into a little bit about what our metabolism is and the role that it plays in keeping us alive, I mean, I think that'd be a little bit helpful. Yeah.
Yeah. So, you've got about 37 trillion cells, give or take. And every one of them, right? Every one of those cells is busy right now at work, and very little of it has to do with moving you around or anything like that. Most of it's just taking nutrients in, chopping them up, putting them back together, making different products your cells need, getting rid of waste products, all that just daily housekeeping stuff, right? And all of that is work, and work takes energy. And when we measure all that energy together, we call it your metabolism, right? And you say it that way, and it's kind of obvious that, wow, movement, exercise is only one category of the kind of work that cells do, right? Your brain is burning calories all the time. Your kidneys, your liver, all of it's just constantly ticking away. Your immune system, your reproduction, all of it's burning calories. And so, we have been shaped, and this is again where my sort of an evolutionary perspective I think is useful. We've been shaped over 500 million years of vertebrate evolution, right? Things with backbones, fish and the rest of us, shaped by evolution to get really good at turning resources from our environment into offspring. That's all it cares about. So the tasks that are involved in that, which are they all burn energy: growing up, reproducing, maintenance, staying alive, all that stuff. Your body's keeping track of all that calorie throughput, whether you know it or not, right? And it's allocating energy to all those different tasks to maximize, reproductive output, basically. And so that's what your body, that's metabolism. If you ask a physiologist, an evolutionary physiologist, that's metabolism. It's not just exercise. It's not just diet, right?
Wait. I thought, from watching the History Channel, I thought the aliens dropped us off here a number of years ago. What? I'm completely no. I mean,
I know. But that's not too far off from some of the stuff you hear, even in less crazy circles. So that's all right.
But when you look at it, though, I mean, to take a look at this, so at the intelligent design of how our bodies are structured, because yes, our body, every cell produces energy, every cell uses energy, but also too, and this is one of the things that was coming to mind reading through your work, was we also use mechanical energy. I mean, we get mechanical energy. Like, I've had experts on here talking about fascia and tissue resiliency. So there's a combination between chemical energy and mechanical energy that if somebody were to create a cyborg for the purpose of whatever, that the human being is actually would you say that the human being is actually a really good, quote unquote, cyborg for however we were created, if our goal is to be self-sustaining?
That's interesting. An interesting idea. Yeah. I mean, again, we're products of evolution, and every generation has been successful at reproducing. So on some level, of course, we must be resilient to have survived over the eons, Now, on the other hand, if you look at one of my things I've trained in is comparative anatomy, the anatomy of chimpanzees and gorillas and all of our closest relatives. And if you look at the ligaments in a chimpanzee knee, they're the same ligaments as in your knee and mine, right? So even though we have all this extra stress on our hind legs because we're on 2 legs versus 4, like an ape would be. Most apes would be. We don't have any extra pieces or parts to kind of keep our knees more stable, and so we're more likely to get injured that way, right? So in some ways, we're incredibly efficient. Human walking is really efficient. Our gas mileage when we walk is impressive.
Well, I want to ask you a question on that in a second, but the one thing I teach when I teach, like, do lectures and workshops on biomechanics, one of the things I point out, doctor, is that almost every four-legged mammal that comes out can walk almost immediately because they have 4 points of contact with the ground, and they're loaded. Their spine is horizontal to gravity. Whereas humans, our first year of living is basically a strength and conditioning program to be able to walk on 2 feet. I mean, that's like my little. I kind of get people thinking about like everything we need to know about movement. I learned so much of movement by watching my 2 kids go from rolling, crawling, sitting up. So I think it's, what did you learn? And this kind of a slight segue, but what did you learn from studying primates? Because you have a chapter in your book about that, about some of your observations. What did you learn by studying? I'm just pulling up the chapter here that you call it how humans, because I like this, how humans evolved to be the nicest, fittest, and fattest apes. I think it's a great chapter title.
Yeah, well, that was one of the fun things about this book, by the way, I'll just say, is the sort of the invitation to take the stuff I love and the science I've had the really great fortune to do and write about it. I hope the fun and the adventure comes through in the writing, because it's been fun work to do. So it
was an easy read. I mean, it was a very easy read. That's
great to hear. Well, so, that's right. So if you look at other primates, so monkeys and apes and lemurs, this is another discovery my lab made, and I want to also make sure these are all big collaborative efforts, right? You don't go by yourself, the lone dude, to do any of these projects. These are all big collaborative efforts. So shout out to my collaborators. But one of the things we discovered early on in trying to take this really metabolism first approach to anthropology is, if you look at all the primates, including us, we all burn energy more slowly than other mammals. So dogs, herbivore, ungulates, rodents, bats, they all burn energy faster than us. And we think part of that change, that big metabolic change, we're talking like a 50% reduction in energy expenditure.
Wow.
Yeah, is part of the reason that we grow so slowly, right? And it's not just humans. So humans grow slowly compared to other animals. Think about your dogs and cats, right? Dogs and cats are adults by the time they're 1 year old. They're, even if they have a great life, they're probably gone by the time they're in their teens, right? It's a quick life if you're a dog or a cat, and that's typical for most mammals. They grow up fast, and sadly they die fast. Humans, we grow slowly, age slowly, reproduce slowly, die old if you're lucky. You hope so. And so all primates are like that. We have these really slow lives. And so our metabolism is actually, we can thank our metabolism for that, these slow primate metabolisms. But then if you look within the apes, which is within our immediate family, humans have faster metabolic rates than the other apes do. We've sort of somehow, we're still not as fast as other mammals, as non-primate mammals, but we're faster than the other apes. And that sort of acceleration in our metabolic rate, well, we have to fuel it first of all. So it means that somehow we're able to successfully and reliably get more food. And part of the thing I talk about there is the hunting and gathering, which I said that's the fundamental human strategy, is this great way to make sure you never run out of food, because you hunt, I gather, right? And at the end of the day, we share. All humans share food, and no other primates really do. And that allows us to just sort of have this sort of fail safe. We don't ever have to worry too much about running out of food. We've also gotten fatter than other apes do. Other apes are, so we think that might also be kind of a reserve tank for this fast metabolism. But that faster metabolism, what does it do for you? Well, it lets you have a big brain, because brains are really metabolically expensive. So you have to have a fast engine to be able to support that. We have big babies more often. Most apes, they don't have their next kid until the first one's weaned and halfway grown up.
Oh, wow.
Right. But ours are, as we know, you can have big, I come from a big Roman Catholic part of family, and a big Roman Catholic part of Pennsylvania. So I can tell you, you can have lots and lots of kids. That's what you want to do. And it's harder for an ape to do that. It would be hard because of the metabolic constraints. So, so, again, from that evolutionary perspective, that's what's so fascinating to me is all of the changes that have happened over eons that have kind of shaped who we are. It really makes life what we recognize today as human.
And because my understanding is, and again, this is not a podcast about anthropology, but my understanding is that humans and like apes are very, very similar. So we can learn a lot about by studying them. I mean, there's like a very minor discrepancy in what is it, the genome, and that's
Oh, a
getting
couple
into
percent. Yeah.
yeah. What is it?
It's a couple percent. They're like, the cocktail factoid is you're 98% chimpanzee, which means, there's a lot of regulatory genes that can have really big effects. So it doesn't mean that but that's genetically in terms of the A's and T's and C's and G's in your DNA. Yeah, about 98% are the same.
And see, but I think that's a fascinating thing to think about because in our modern world, like my kids are at the age now, and this is one thing I'm seeing. I live in the land of suburbia. I'm in North County, San Diego, and I live right near a big popular playground that I used to take my kids to when they're very little, like 2, 3, 4 years old. My kids are now a little bit older. They're 6 and 8 years old, and they're at that age where kids are not going to the playground as much anymore. They're starting to do more kind of organized sports. They're starting to do more in normal times, right? We don't have them in full organized sports right now, but we're doing like little mini camps and stuff. But that's one thing I've observed is that we go from being very active when we're young to now you're probably going to be at that desk for a while. You're going to be in your lab, and you don't get out and play in a playground anymore. And the reason where I'm going with this question, with this statement, is talk a little bit about the energy expenditure in human movement, because I think you did a great job of breaking that down. Because one of the things I try to get people thinking about is it's not just exercise, right? Exercise is 40 to 60 minutes a day. And you talked about the energy cost of exercise being very minimal. It's all the other stuff we do throughout the day, what is called NEAT, the non-exercise activity thermogenesis. But talk a little bit. I thought you did a great breakdown, Doc, of going through the different ways that we spend energy between walking, running, and what's the most energy expensive. If we really want to burn per foot or per distance the maximum amount of energy, what's going to be the maximal output?
Oh, that's easy. You can either go swimming or go climbing.
Yeah, I thought the way you broke that down was great. I mean, you did a great job of kind of laying it out, of saying here's what you burn walking, here's what you burn climbing.
Yeah. I mean, it's incredible what you burn climbing because your body has evolved, as you said. We're really efficient bipeds, and so your body, if you think about that kind of like roller coaster, trajectory your body does as you walk, right? I mean, that's why you've got a top on your coffee cup, right? That's why Starbucks sells you a lid, because when you walk, you're kind of up and down and up and down. And it's so subtle, you kind of don't notice it. And of course, your brain does a great job stabilizing everything, which is why, if somebody walks with a camera, you look at the camera footage later and it's all jerky.
Yeah.
Right? But it wasn't jerky for the person, right? Because your body's really good at smoothing that out. But anyway, that's a whole other fun biomechanics tangent. But your body's really good at moving on the ground because that's kind of what we're evolved to do. Now you start climbing or you start swimming. Well, that's just harder. It's just, there's no way around that. You're lifting your weight up, either up a flight of steps, or if you like, I enjoy rock climbing. It's one of the things I wish I had more time to do. When I was younger, like I said, I used to do it a lot more. But there's sort of no way around the physics problem of taking this weight and lifting it up a rock wall. That takes energy, and it takes a lot more energy than walking, a comparable distance. So, but all of that stuff is it gets swamped. Even active people are spending more energy on the background stuff that they don't really pay attention to than on that exercise. And I think that's an important point.
So it's kind of like, first one comment, what I thought about, and again, this is something I've kind of noticed for years, is that when you're walking and running, you're getting mechanical energy from the ground. You're getting the fascia muscles, kind of that pliability or that response mechanism, that loading mechanism. Whereas in swimming, cycling, climbing, you don't get that ground reaction force. You're not getting, like swimming, there is no ground reaction force. It's pure 100% muscle generating energy to move through the water. And that's why, I mean, I can go down to the beach right now and look at the surfers out there. Ain't too many fat surfers coming out of the water.
No, that's right. That's right. Well, and for that matter, while you're at the beach, go for a run, right? Yeah. And the sand sucks up all that springiness. You don't get to use it anymore. And it's hard as heck to run in the sand. That's exactly why, because you lose all those fascia springs that you get to take advantage of on a hard surface.
Well, then let's talk a little bit about, let's kind of shift gears a little bit and talk a little bit about the digestive process.
Yeah.
Because again, for people that want to really understand the metabolism and do it in a way that applies to how we're living today, I think you do a great job of breaking this down. And yeah, I like the science. Admittedly, I like the science, but sometimes it goes over my head. So, but you do a great, you do, I like the way you kind of lay it out, because it's like, oh, okay, even though I might have learned it years ago, you kind
Yeah.
of, you do a good job of laying it out. So if you could discuss a little bit about how does the food we eat turn into carbohydrate? I mean, the food we eat contains
Sure.
carbohydrates, proteins, and all that, but how does it turn into the energy at the cellular level?
Right. Well, it comes down to the big three. You eat a slice of pepperoni pizza, right? And all of that mix of stuff that makes it so good, it doesn't matter what you have on there, all the toppings, no matter what it is, it's really going to get broken down into three groups of nutrients, right? It really is that simple. Your proteins get broken down into amino acids. All the carbohydrates and all the sugars eventually get broken down into monosaccharides, simple sugars like glucose. Most of them get broken down into glucose, some into fructose. Anyway, and all the fats get broken down into fatty acids, right? So that's really we call them the macronutrients, just the big three: carbs, fats, and proteins. And all that gets sucked into your blood, and then your body reassembles them for use, right? So the amino acids get put back into proteins, and that becomes the tissues that you broke down that day get built back up with the amino acids in your food. Fats either get burned or stored as fat. All the carbs either get burned or stored as either glycogen or fat, and it really is, I'm glossing over all the pathways. And so somebody's going to write in and yell, but that really is the deal. The one funny trick is you can take sugars and turn them into fat, and you can take fats, and you can take different food like proteins. You can burn them down and burn them for energy. You can actually turn proteins, for example, into sugars, and you can turn fats into sugar. So there's a little bit of cross pathways there. I like to talk about it like it's a subway map, right? You got these three big lines: fats, carbs, and proteins, and there are these sort of middle lines between the three. Anyhow, but so it all comes down really to the fats and carbs you're bringing in. Are you burning that many calories off, or are you not? And that's where the rubber hits the road in terms of weight change and all that stuff.
And what do we get wrong about that? Because again, I mean, for years we've been taught, that this mythology is energy in, energy out. And you have the second law of thermodynamics: energy is neither created nor destroyed; it's merely transferred.
Yeah.
What is some of the reality? What do we get wrong about understanding metabolism? Like and I don't mean that in a negative way, but I mean, like, what can we learn from our current understanding about metabolism for how we might be able to think differently about how we go about our day?
Sure. Yeah. So, first of all, the laws of thermodynamics are real, and I'm not, those are true. And it really does, I think, come down to calories in, calories out. I don't think there's any doubt about that. Because like you say, nothing can be destroyed or produced. It's just moved around. But right now, I tell you that, and you say, okay, try to take that advice on board. You think, okay, well, all I got to do is keep track of my calories. Well, good luck, right? Good luck. Because first of all, it's really hard to know how many calories you burn. People, those online calculators you are looking at are wrong. Well, it's a good guess, but it's not, it's easily off by a couple hundred calories, easily, for any one of us, right? And that's just normal human variation. And it's also, if you try to keep track of how many calories you eat, like if you even keep a food diary, we know that people are bad at that too, right? And they sort of forget that they had a Coke with lunch, or they forget about the, bag of chips they had to tie themselves over, whatever, who knows why or how, but we know that people are missing, 20 or 30% of the calories to eat every day.
Doc, if you eat it while standing up, it doesn't count. Isn't that one?
Stuff like that. Exactly. And so, it's a total mess. And then add on to that what we started off this conversation talking about, which is that if I'm more active than you, then my body will spend the calories differently. My body responds to those lifestyle changes, not in a simple way, like an engine that I can rev higher or lower. Your body's playing into tricks behind the scenes to shuffle things around. And so you know, you think you're burning more calories because you just started an exercise program, but actually you're not, because your body's figured out a way to keep energy the same, even though you're more active, right? So it's really, really, really hard to count calories. And so I think that's why it has led to so much frustration, and people just say, oh, calories in, calories out. That's such BS, because that doesn't work. Because I tried it for myself and it doesn't work. And I'm sympathetic because I know how hard it is to track that stuff. I totally get it. But, you know, just because you're bad at balancing your checkbook doesn't mean that, you know, that that your bank account isn't full of, it doesn't come down to how the money comes in and goes out, you know. Just because you're a bad accountant doesn't mean that calories aren't the currency. You know what I'm saying? So I think, you know, the way that we have to think about it, because the calories in, calories out, counting the calorie stuff, that's so hard to do. Even if you're, you know, in a research lab, it's hard to do. I think instead we have to start thinking about the way that we respond to different kinds of foods. You know, are we eating diets where we just can't get enough and we start seeing the number on the scale go up? Or are we eating diets where we feel full and healthy and that number is where we need it to be? You know, I think sort of paying attention to it that way, you know, pay attention to the bank account. Don't try to count receipts and do the calories in, calories out. Pay attention to the account number, you know, that's your body weight, and see where that is. And that's what you really need to focus on.
Well, to share a story with you, because then I want to ask a question about how you measure calories in the lab. Because I use for years, I mean, I have an Apple Watch 6 here, which the company, I know a couple people in the Fitness Plus program at Apple, and I'm test driving this for them a little bit. But years ago, when I worked at the American Council on Exercise, I spent one summer riding my bike to work. Not every day, but 2 days a week, I'd ride my bike to work. I lived in downtown San Diego. The office was 9.5, 10 miles away. And I would do one of two routes. You know, so there was very little variability. The only difference between the route was whether I really wanted to punish myself on a climb or I just wanted to be uncomfortable on a climb. That was the only difference between the two routes.
Right.
But what I was doing, and I had a polar heart rate monitor on, was in the morning, I would come in the morning and I'd write down a little notebook. I'd write down my notebook, my time and my calories expended. The distance remained relatively the same. There's maybe a half mile variance between the two. And what I noticed from May to mid-September, I started doing that in early May to about mid-September, was I went from burning around 650, maybe 700 calories in the spring to burning somewhere around 500, maybe 550 calories by the early fall. So not much had changed in terms of the distance, but what had changed is my body was more efficient I mean, is that accurate? I mean, you're a perfect person to ask, because my you know, with my colleagues, we're kind of like, it makes sense. We're kind of like coming up on little hypotheses. And again, this is a study of one, so there's no scientific validity to it, but it's just me being a geek and keeping track of it. So, and then I want to ask you a question about measuring calories. So, if you could.
I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical about the, and on one very particular level. I'm not skeptical that you saw that change. Absolutely, that makes total sense. But what you might have had, and what you're more likely to have had, is a change in stroke volume and cardiac output, and the efficiency with which you use that blood, the oxygen out of that blood, nutrients out of that blood, to fuel yourself. And so your muscles are still burning the same number of calories, but your heart's gotten better at delivering the nutrients. And so, you know, that's the problem with all of these fitness trackers. Not the problem. I don't want to be mean about it, because I think they're great. But this is the caveat that people have to remember. It's not measuring calories, it's measuring your heart rate, right? Just like the trackers on most smart watches, some of them do heart rate now, but you know, even the old school ones, I remember those
5 years ago.
that just do movement. They're not measuring calories, they're measuring movement, right? And and then, you know, you ask me how I measure calories. I measure it with oxygen consumption and CO2 production, right? I'm measuring those molecules going into and out of your mitochondria to actually make ATP, which is the molecule that your body uses for energy. And so, you know, I think there's a disconnect there between all this really cool technology that is a great way to keep track of how active we are, which is super important and is maybe the fundamental thing to worry about. And when we call that calories, everybody in my neck of the woods in metabolic physiology are, you can see people's shoulders go up, because like, well, it's not really calories.
Yours did. When you watched the video of this, yours did. You had that little you had that reaction. But I think you're right on the money, because I would
Yeah,
agree 100% that that was my hypothesis, that my stroke volume, my oxygen consumption, hemoglobin
yeah,
became more efficient over that time by cycling 2 times a week. My body
right.
got more efficient at carrying oxygen to the working muscles. So therefore, and again, when you look at this stuff, I'm pointing to my fitness tracker. When you
Yeah,
look at this stuff, what they're doing is you're measuring your heart rate, and they're trying to do an estimate based on your the blood volume moving per minute.
sure.
So when you look at, because I thought you do something that we don't see much anymore, and that I'm a big fan of, and that's using METs, because METs measures oxygen consumption. But why is oxygen consumption really the key to understanding caloric expenditure?
Oh, that's a great question. So, you know, all of the work that we just talked about, your 37 trillion cells doing, okay, all of it, whether it's making estrogen or it's making a neuron in your brain fire or it's moving a muscle, all of it uses the same molecule, which is ATP, adenosine triphosphate. And so that is the fuel of all cell activity. And you can make ATP without oxygen. And when you need energy in a quick burst, like a sprint or a power lift or something like that, then you don't need oxygen for that. But the huge majority of what we do, you do need oxygen to make that ATP. And it's getting the ATP gets made in a little part of your cell called the mitochondria, which has its own crazy billion year history. It used to be a bacteria that got pulled into a cell 2 million. It's a crazy story. Anyway, we now have these little organelles in our cells called mitochondria, and they take the carbon-based fuels from our diets, either glucose or fatty acids, and they chop them up. And as they pull them apart, it's like you have these big carbon molecules, and when you pull them apart, it's like they release all this energy from getting ripped apart. You can think about it like pulling like those. I'm picturing those like firecrackers that you pull the string and they go puff, right? It's kind of
Yeah.
like that. You pull the carbon molecule off and it goes bang. And all that energy gets stored up and eventually gets converted into this stuff called ATP. And to make that conversion happen, you need oxygen. And in fact, you take the oxygen in and you put a couple protons on it and you turn it into water, which is kind of crazy to think about, right? So we're actually producing water. Your cells make water over the course of a day, which is kind of fun to think about. And by the way, while you're doing that, you're also, those carbons that you pulled off, they become carbon dioxide. And so that's why we can measure both of these things, carbon dioxide production or the oxygen that you take in and never leaves again, as really that is the nuts and bolts. That is the machinery that makes the fuel that everything runs on. And so if you're, a physiologist like I am, I get anthropologist, physiologist, I don't know what the best I am. It depends on the conversation, I guess. But, if you're trained like I'm trained, or what we do in my lab, it's oxygen and CO2, and everything else is guessing. Everything else is an estimate. If it's movement based or if it's heart rate based, it's great, but it's not really the same as if you go and are measuring what's happening inside the cell like we can do when we measure oxygen and CO2.
And see, I think that you did a great job of breaking that down. And for listeners, what we did when I worked at the American Council on Exercise a number of years ago, we actually kind of really ruffled, kind of created ripples in our industry and personal trainers, because for years we told people that the magic formula was 220 minus age, right? If you want to find training, if you want to try and find exercise intensity, do 220 minus age. But my colleague, who's a professor at San Diego State, who's been on the podcast a number of times, Fabio Camana, he was like, we're getting ready to write the 4th edition of our personal trainer manual. He said, no, let's take that out of there and let's put the talk test in. And the talk test, I don't know if you're familiar with Bakari and Foster's work, but the talk test for listeners is when you're working at a harder rate, just as Dr. Pontzer described, when you're working at a harder rate, your body's going to start shuttling towards using carbohydrate for fuel because it can make energy quicker. And the byproduct of that is carbon dioxide. And expiring, if I want to make sure I'm getting the science correctly, but expiring carbon dioxide limits the ability to talk. So therefore, it is a good way and where I'm going with that is now what we try to teach trainers to think about is when you're working with a client, pay attention to their breathing rate and their ability to talk as an estimate of their work intensity. would that be a more efficient way if people are interested in burning calories, if people want to go out and quote unquote be in the fat burning zone or want to train efficiently?
Yeah.
Would that be an efficient way? How is that a more efficient way to think about exercise as opposed to just heart rate?
Yeah, well, that's interesting. I mean, I'm familiar with the Borg scale and with the perceived exertion and the talk test I've heard of. I haven't really implemented it much in my lab. We don't do tons of that sort of exercise testing in my lab these days. But so what you're talking about is, if I understand the question is, how do we get to that zone where the body's able to burn lots of fat in the mix? Because you're always burning a mix of fat and carbs, right? Unless you push it too hard. You push it too hard and it's all carbs,
Yeah.
right? And that's going to be your glycogen stores. That's not what you want. You want to burn the fat stores, right? Most of us, if you're trying so that's a really good point. If you're pushing yourself so hard that you can't talk while you're doing it, then that's a good indicator that the mix of fuels is really carb heavy. And I don't know, it would be interesting to sort of figure out how this has to do with, either turning energy away from the ability to talk so much as when your breathing rate goes up really high, because we talk through our vocal tract, right? So you have to sort of tense it and control it to be able to make a sound. And if you're, you can hardly keep up anyhow, then that's tensing for a moment to be able to talk. It's really hard to do. So it'd be fun to kind of piece out exactly why that talk test is so effective, but I have no doubt it is. That makes good sense to me.
Yeah, and I just want people to think about that because the reason why I brought that up is I think a lot of people still get so beholden, and I'm pointing to my fitness tracker now. I think people get so beholden to their heart rate, whereas if we just pay attention to our breathing rate and be able, because when we can breathe and talk, we can burn more. My understanding is we metabolize more fats as fuel, whereas just as you mentioned, you're getting out of breath, you're more carbohydrate. Now to shift gears real quick, one of the things I wrote down that I want to ask you about because I need to understand this better. I hear it all the time: ketogenic diet, keto this, keto that. And you mentioned you have a specific call out on ketones.
Sure.
What if you could talk for a moment about what ketones are and what do people mean by like a ketogenic diet? And let's take it back to the Hadza, to your work. Are the hunter-gatherer tribes, are they following the ketogenic diet or not? I mean, so if you could talk just a little bit about what those are.
Sure. So a ketogenic diet means that one in which your body produces ketones. So how does it do that? Well, in the mitochondria, particularly, as you're taking in fats, right? So it gets down to this combination of carbs and fats that you're burning. If you don't have any carbs in your diet, no sugars, no carbohydrates, then your body is forced to burn fats for fuel. That's fine. Your body can do that. Your body's pretty good at that. And so but those molecules are much bigger, and it's not the same as a small glucose molecule. Instead, you're bringing in these big, long chain fatty acids to burn down. And when you do that process, just the enzymatic chopping up of that molecule in your, to get it burned in your mitochondria, doesn't just produce the usual products that your mitochondria use for ATP. It also produces these molecules called ketones. Okay, and so those ketones can also go off and be used as fuel as well. They can also go into a mitochondria and get turned into ATP. And so a ketogenic diet is one in which we see that ketone molecule. Ketones are a kind of molecule. We see those floating around in your blood, and sometimes we can even measure them in your urine, right? Because you make so much of them, they clear out of your urine, and we can measure them in urine. And so people are really hot on these as a way to lose weight, or some people say that you should live your life in a ketogenic state. I'm skeptical. I'm skeptical for a couple of reasons. One is that as far as we can tell, most animals are able to go into ketogenesis. There's this interesting thing about carnivores maybe are bad at it, but I know that, for example, orangutans can go into ketogenesis. There's nothing human unique to our evolution that allows us to go into ketogenesis. And it's a response that you have to not having any carbs in your diet, which is usually a starvation response. Because if you eat a mix of things and all of a sudden you take half that mix away, well, guess what? That's your energy income's low and you're starving. So ketogenesis is a normal starvation response. You can go into ketogenesis if you only eat fats, and then you're not starving because you're getting all the calories you need, but you're in this really weird, really kind of unique sort of space where you're eating such a fat-heavy, zero-carb diet that the only pathway your body has to make energy is by burning fats, and that's when you kick out the ketones. Some people swear by it. And it makes sense in a way that if you go that route, you might feel more full because fatty meals can feel full. If you have a ketogenic diet, it's usually a meat-heavy diet, a lot of proteins make you feel full. Okay, so I can understand, everybody can understand why they would work to help you lose weight, maybe to make you feel full on fewer calories. The idea that there's some natural evolved human diet, I'm really skeptical about. And that's because, so to answer your second question, if you look at a group like the Hadza, you look broadly around other hunting and gathering groups that we have data on, there's no evidence that they're ketogenic ever. The Hadza eat plenty of carbs. They get about 50% of their diet from honey, which is just sugar and water. There might be some low levels of ketogenesis in like Arctic groups, but actually Arctic living is a really recent phenomenon. Like it's as recent as farming. Most of our history has been in the tropics and the temperate regions where plant foods would have been available a lot. So anyway, this gets to a sort of soapbox thing. I've probably already gone on too long in this answer ranting.
But one of the things that popped into mind is kind of like the periodization of nutrition, right? I mean, I'm a big fan of what's the old joke is a vegan, a CrossFitter, and an atheist walk into the bar, and how do you know? Because they tell you. So I just have personally have very little patience for anybody who espouses any type of lifestyle of anything, especially when it comes to diets, because I'm sure in your studies is one of your observations, and we'll begin to wrap it up here, but is one of your observations that a nomadic population is going to have different diets throughout the year. Certain times of the year, there's going to be more meat availability. Other times of the year, they're going to have to rely more on tubers and more on other things they find. So doesn't our physiology, doesn't our biology, how does our biology naturally support kind of a shifting diet?
No, that's exactly right. Over the course of a year, if we go from one group to another, I mean, look around the world today at all the diversity of diets that different cultures have. Do you think it's ever been any different than that? Right? I mean, cultural diversity, dietary diversity has been the norm across time, across space. And so the idea that somebody says, no, you have to eat, or you should eat, or we're evolved to eat the one pure thing, that's a red flag for anybody out there. And I want to also say, hey, if you found a diet that works for you, great. My book is not a diet book. I'm not trying to sell anybody on anything. But what I would like to inject into the conversation is maybe a little sanity, which is that, look, humans can do great on a range of diets for the reason you said, right? We have to be adaptable. We are adaptable. So exactly, just exactly to your point, where we can eat a lot of range of different diets and be healthy.
And then the final question, doctor, because this is I've been reading through, I don't know if you know David Sinclair. I think he was at Harvard.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, the same. But I'm reading through his book now about aging, and that's a big thread of the podcast and the work that I do is the caloric restriction. I mean, because when you look at how we can slow down the aging process, one of the big ways is obviously exercise. But when it comes to metabolism, they're looking at caloric restriction, intermittent fasting. So have you done any work on that? Did you do any observation on how caloric restriction kind of affects our metabolism and whether that's a good thing or a bad thing? I mean,
it's not a huge focus of our work. Because when we look out across populations like the Hadza, they're not trying to restrict their calories necessarily, right? But I know that work. I find it super interesting. A lot of my colleagues work on that. So what I can tell you is it does seem to have. There's this long-term calorie restriction study called the Calorie Study that does seem to show the kinds of benefits that we see in other species when we restrict their calories. People, eat fewer calories, and oxidative stress levels seem to go down, and other markers of health seem to improve. So, I think there's something there. I think what's interesting to me is the way that calorie restriction seems to make your body reallocate and kind of prioritize the way it spends its calories more judiciously. We seem to see a reflection of that in the way that your body responds to exercise too. That you spend more energy on exercise and your body goes, okay, well, we have fewer calories now to do these other things, so let's do them more judiciously. And so both of those, I think, are going to be this key to healthy aging. Absolutely. And I'll just say that, the Hadza are a great example of healthy aging. You got men and women in their 60s, 70s, even 80 years old out there trekking along to go get foods every day. I mean, if the mix of sort of whole food diets and lots of exercise seems to work for them. So I think it'll work for us.
Doc, I'm just getting this. I'm getting this image in my mind. If you hear a news story in the coming next day or two about somebody going into a Whole Foods here in Del Mar, California, wearing only a loincloth and start digging around in a pile of sweet potatoes with a sharp stick, I might be
Yeah,
guilty of that because you refer to Whole Foods and you refer to this, and I'm kind
that's
of getting this
right.
image of somebody going into Whole Foods as a hunter gatherer.
Well,
If I walk into Whole Foods with a spear in my hand and one of those what do they call those claws they gather things in, and
that's
I
right.
start
That's a
poking.
thing. That's such a good point, though. I mean, obviously that's hilarious, but so much of the paleo stuff, the paleo diet stuff, is like it becomes this cosplay, right? Like I'm gonna have to dress up, and I can't wash my hair, and I can't wear shoes, and it's like, guys, we're taking the wrong lessons here, right? the, the lesson is, let's take the good principles here about exercise and let's bring those into our lives, not like pretend to be hunter gatherers. Like that's just so silly. But anyway, yeah. Well, I'll be on the lookout for the news, though.
You kind of said that, but then the final question and the final question I wanted to wrap up with this is you studied some people in Georgia. I didn't really go deep into that thread in your book.
Oh yeah.
But you studied populations in Georgia. You've studied populations in Africa. Where's been your favorite place to travel? Where's been the place that you are like that you just really because I see that picture over your shoulder and that looks like one of the
Yeah.
tribesmen of the Hadza. But where's like
Yeah.
the place that you really just kind of blew your mind just from spending time there?
Ah, the best part about my job is how many different places I get to go and all the different folks I get to see, and it's all really fun. So that's almost impossible to answer. But if I had to pick, it's the Hadza. To be in a hunter-gatherer camp and to see that way of life still going and see people still doing it is just so different. And at the same time, what you notice after a while is how similar it all is. Kids are still kids. Friends are still friends, sitting around a fire talking. Like daily life has the same rhythm and the same kind of vibe, and sort of this juxtaposition of, wow, culturally is very different, but day-to-day life is still, they're still very much the same. I love that connection and the way you kind of come back to your own. What's the line? The purpose of travel is to go abroad and come back and see your own life in a different way. I'm paraphrasing it, but I think I get the most of that kind of effect when I get to travel in Africa, and especially with the Hadza. It's a lot of fun. So, yeah, if I had to pick one, I guess I got to pick that one.
All right, well, Dr. Herman Pontzer, the author of Burn, how can people get more information about your book? I mean, obviously, I'm sure they can pick it up anywhere books are available, but if people are interested in your work and want to find out more about what you're doing and doing with your lab at Duke, how can people follow along or find, be
Sure.
kept up to date?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, the book's available everywhere books are sold. So go and check it out. If you want to hear more about what I'm doing here at Duke, you can Google, check us out at the Pontzer Lab here at Duke. We're online and easy to find. And if you want to find out more about the Hadza, and especially if you want to maybe help them out, you can go to HadzAFund, HadzAFund.org, and you can find out about our work. You can find out more about Hadza culture. You can find out some of the ways that researchers like myself are giving back to try to, help them out as best we can. And all of those would be great resources for people who get excited about the book.
That's awesome. Well, Doctor, thank you for your time today. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me. It was a lot of fun.